Hello, welcome to MD Media Show. Today we have a special guest, Yusuf Garehwat, who was with us a number of times, including having his own show, In Depth with Yusuf G. Today we are bringing him back with a special topic, Symposium. Why do we need regime change in Eritrea? Now, this is a symposium that will be held in Washington, D.C., July 14th to 16th, just in a week. Yosef, welcome to Yemedi Media. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm back again. And thank you also to our listeners. Thank you.
Great. So, those of you who are following us live, I want you, and I would appreciate if you can share it with many people so that many can access this and on your platforms, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, what have you. And we are also broadcasted on satellite under HBS, Horn Broadcasting Services, to the Horn of Africa. So we appreciate also our viewers in Eritrea, Tigray, and the Horn at large. So we'll talk about this symposium, and by the end of the show, I hope our viewers would understand why, what, how, and if they want to attend, they will also provide that. So this is July 14th to 16th, and the big question that the symposium will be asking and answering is why do we need a regime change in Eritrea now? So this is organized by Seedlings for Peace and Democracy in Eritrea, FALSI in Tigrinya. And Yosef, first off, let's start with the first question in terms of what is this symposium set to achieve? What is the objective?
Well, okay. Our messaging is mainly oriented towards the West. We believe that at least there are two things why we are doing this thing. Our premise is that the West never understood the Isaias regime for what it is. Uh, by that I mean the West never understood the depths and scope of Sha'biya's depravity or the Isaias regime's depravity. They simply took it for another dictatorship among many other dictatorships in Africa. As a result of that, their main response to what the Eritrean government was doing, both its own people and the neighborhood, was at best engagement. We have to engage the Isaias regime and slowly, reform it. That's at best. And at worst, they said containment. We have to. This is not working. Engagement is not working. So we have to contain it. That was their response. Uh, when it comes to EU, for example, the European Union, at times it got to downright appeasement. For example, all that they were interested in these 30 years was the migration problem in Europe as a result of tens of thousands of Eritreans migrating to Europe. And their solution was throwing money at Shabia. I remember at the beginning they were used to give it tens of millions of euros for uh, in the hope that Isaias would curtail the migration of his people. They knew that the problem was the indefinite national service, so the money was meant to demobilize the Eritrean army. But what it did was the government simply pocketed the money. In fact, I do believe that they used the money to further militarize Eritrea, and they never, took lessons from the past, from the precedents of what they have been doing. So they have been doing that up to now, up to this war. This is a war that probably gives them an idea that this regime is irredeemable. Not only that, that it's a very toxic regime. That has not only terrorized its own population, but it is set out to demobilize the whole neighborhood, and they have seen it doing in Tigray and Ethiopia. The same holds true for also among with the US. The US, if you have, unfortunately, I haven't sent it to you the article, but what the US did was in last year in their report of the foreign policy of the US, towards Eritrea. What they did was you could easily see how they have gotten it totally wrong when it comes to the nature of the Isaias regime. What happened at that time was when they wrote that they said that when Isaias and Abiy came together in 2018, they took that as a good sign that Isaias was reforming or that Isaias was changing. They did believe that. They thought that this time around, that is working for peace. And that has been one of the main reasons as to why the United Nations later uh, uh, took off, the sanctions on Eritrea. So you could easily see that anybody who knows Isaias, the idea that when Isaias and Abiy met in Jeddah, could easily see that it was not meant for it was not meant for peace, but for an alliance against Tigray, They couldn't get this picture precisely because they never understood the nature of the Isaias regime. So anyway, what I'm trying to tell is that in our symposium, we have documented about 170 articles in uh, uh, I've got it. Okay, all right. You could see well on the 2000. All right, okay.
Okay, go
Anyway,
ahead.
oh
Mm,
yeah, if you find this, that's fine.
mm.
Uh, so what we have done is there were about 170 topics clustered around teams, around 26 teams, and that is supposed to do uh, to show the West the extent and the depth of the depravity of the Isaias regime, that it is irredeemable, that it is not your typical dictatorship in Africa, that it's a totalitarian regime that has to be seen at a different level. That is the whole idea behind it. Another thing that we want to show the West is uh, there is another one that we want to show the West is the intimate link between what the Isaias regime has been doing to its people to what it is now doing to the neighborhood in general and Tigray in particular. That these two things are intimately related. In the past 30 years, they have held these two apart of one another. For example, whenever uh, the West penalizes the Isaias regime, it has been because of what it has done outside of Eritrea. It has never penalized the regime for what it does to its own people. The totalitarian terror under which the Eritreans are living under the Isaias regime has never been the focus of the West. But what we are trying to do here is that what the terror that has been conducted against its own people is intimately tied to the terror that is being conducted he has been conducting around the neighborhood. Precisely because one of the reasons why he went against Tigray is he felt that uh, Tigray has become um, a liability in the sense that hundreds of thousands of Eritreans were flocking to Tigray, either to stay there or to further go, outside in the world. So Tigray was deliberately or not deliberately uh, hemorrhaging Eritrea. So the idea is if Eritrea has to remain sealed off, as a totalitarian regime sealed off from the rest of Ethiopia or Tigray or any other neighborhood, then the nations have to cooperate with Eritrea in sealing off that nation. And that is what Tigray has not been doing. So these two things are intimately tied to each other precisely because what the government does in terrorizing its people in the neighborhood is always trying to extend its life at the helm of the power. It doesn't know anything better. That's how it stays in power for a long time. Remember that it has already conducted 5 wars against the neighborhood, against Libya, Djibouti, Sudan, Ethiopia, and the latest one against Tigray. For Sha'biya, this is uh, uh, a means. It considers it's an existential threat. All the neighborhoods are an existential threat, and the only way it could survive is by uh, through confrontations. And that part of the Isaias regime has to be told clearly in clear language. So that's one of the things that we are doing in that one. So primarily, this symposium is oriented towards the West, but that doesn't mean we don't have anything to say to Tigrayans or to Eritreans in this one. In fact, most of our audience will be made up of Eritreans and Tigrayans. Huh? So it also have we also have many other topics addressing the problems that these people are primarily concerned, such as Tigray genocide, Eritrean genocide, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Mm. Great. I think what you are emphasizing is the nature for the West and everyone else to understand the nature of the Isaias regime. And the question that comes is then why focus on that? Why is it important to focus and emphasize that?
Well, I have touched a little bit, but whenever you talk about Eritrea, even among Eritreans, for especially among the opposition groups in Eritrea, many of the opposition groups have portrayed the Eritrean problem as lack of democracy. That has been uh, a wrong diagnosis, according to me. That has been a wrong diagnosis. Of course, if there was a democracy in Eritrea, we would have avoided all these things, that we are witnessing now inside Eritrea and also outside Eritrea. But that doesn't necessarily mean that is the best way to describe the totalitarian regime in Eritrea. I would say uh, it's lack of normalcy that describes Eritrea better. Normalcy in a sense that this is an abnormal nation among totalitarian nations. That this is an abnormal nation. For example, if you frame the Eritrean problem as lack of democracy, you end up humanizing the totalitarian regime in Eritrea. You are saying, for example, those people who say it's lack of democracy, for example, they will say, uh, for a simple example. Uh, they frame it, the prisoners in Eritrea, they frame it as political prisoners. But there are no political prisoners in Eritrea. I mean, there wouldn't even be 1% of the total prisoners in Eritrea. They wouldn't even count to 1% of that population group. There are more than 400 prisoners in Eritrea, from uh, containers to sprawling concentration camps. Tens of thousands of prisoners are in all of this, in a population of about 2.5 million. And rarely did you see a political prisoner in Eritrea. The few political prisoners were around 2000, when the G15 rebelled against the government, the journalists, and a few of others that supported them. But outside of that, the prisoners in Eritrea are most of them are young men who try to evade the army, who try to desert the army, are caught doing this, and who have been suspected for various reasons. The parents of this deserting or evading young men, and then if you go, it's almost like uh, people that demand on living a normal life. People that don't want the government to interfere in their lives at the magnitude that it is doing now. So if you explain it that way, then you could see the nature of the regime. It's not only totalitarian in the sense that, among other nations, but okay, when it comes to totalitarianism, it tries to control all aspects of the lives uh, of the of the regime. Huh? All aspects of the lives of the regime. For example, you know, you can't attend school freely. Children cannot grow up among the family when they are 16, or they are teenagers at 16, 17 years old. They have to be taken by the government into Sawa, and it owns them, literally owns them, and then it puts them in the indefinite national service for many years. Huh? And then there is, you cannot worship uh, whichever religion you want. Most of the religions are banned. Many of them are, the rest of them are infiltrated. Uh, you can't have, you can't move from one place to another freely. So these are the normal things that people do, even among dictatorships. These are what are lacking in Eritrea. So describing Eritrea as a nation that lacks democracy gets uh, the picture wrong. So that part of it has to be explained. And then you see, even among totalitarian nations, it's a peculiar type uh, of totalitarianism. Let me explain. At one time, I described it as a fluid totalitarianism. Now, every totalitarian nation, there are two things that it wants to do. The first thing that it does is it seals off the nation. You have to seal off the nation of any totalitarian nation if it is to function as if this totalitarian system is going to function. That is a must. For example, look at North Korea. North Korea is a totally sealed nation. You have to succeed in sealing off the nation if you have to remain, if you have to be a successful totalitarian nation. That's first. The second thing that goes with it is you have to have a self-reliant economy. That nation has to have a self-reliant economy. That doesn't mean a very successful economy, but it has to have a self-reliant for one purpose. Because in sealing off the nation and having a self-reliant economy are the two faces of the same coin. Unless you have a self-reliant economy, you cannot seal off the nation, precisely because you will be vulnerable to those people that will help you outside of the system. So you will have to partially or totally open the nation. So in Eritrea case, these are the two things. And the third thing is it has to be a big nation. Totalitarian systems don't work for long in small nations. Hannah Arendt, for example, she claims that she makes that particular point. She says that only big nations could remain totalitarian as a totalitarian system for long, precisely because the cost is too high. For example, in Stalin's Russia, tens of millions died. In Mao's China, 40 or 50 million people died. So in their experimentation, when they keep mobilizing the people. But these two nations have survived the system precisely because they are big ones. Small nations like Cambodia, for example, it only survived for 4 years. It has to collapse after one third of its population died by the Khmer Rouge in their agrarian experimentation. So in the case of Eritrea, though, we see that Eritrea doesn't fulfill all these three requirements. One is it's too small for a nation, which means that it cannot sustain the mobilization that it has been doing in the 30 years because it's too much of an expense. More than 1 million people have left the country. That's part of the expense that it has to pay in order to stay as a totalitarian system. So the expense has been too huge for Eritrea. Second, it's too porous. The borders of Eritrea, look at the Eritrean map now, at the one that you have just been showing us. If you look at it, Uh, Although it's a small nation, it's a sprawling one. It has spread like a amoeba. For that particular reason, it has been very hard for the Eritrean regime to control all the border areas. That's why people have been escaping. I mean, hundreds of thousands of young men have been escaping this. Young men and women have been escaping this precisely because it cannot control its borders. The second one, the third one is it doesn't have any big protector. If a nation is small and wants to remain totalitarian, it will at least have to have a protector, a bigger nation that protects it. Example, again, we go to North Korea. Both the North Korean, the ceiling of the Korean nation, the North Korean nation has been successful precisely because uh, uh, both China and Russia has somewhat uh, agreed with it. Agreed in a sense, in the quotation marks. Uh, they are okay with it so far as they see it as as opposing it against South Korea. So that has been the case. But in Eritrea, there is no such nation that protects it. And then, in addition to that, there are no accommodating nations. There hasn't been, at least up to now, that accommodate Eritrea to remain the totalitarian system. Both Ethiopia, Tigray, and Sudan, at least until before the war, uh, they were not accommodating Eritrea. In the sense, they were not helping Eritrea in sealing off its borders. And then, even though self-reliance has been the motto of Eritrea since the beginning of the war, for almost half a century, رئيس مركوسا, they say it in Tigrinya, Eritrea remains too dependent on the outside to have a self-sufficient economy. For example, the huge part of the Eritrean economy is run by diaspora Eritreans. It comes from diaspora Eritreans through remittance, 2% tax, and other donations, in quotation marks, of course. And then there is also the issue of Eritreans coming in and out, especially the supporters of Eritrea coming in and out every year. Tens of thousands might go to Eritrea. They call it tourism, but again, tourism in quotation marks. So that has made the closing, the sealing of the nation almost impossible. The last one is a low-tech country. Usually, the reason why totalitarianism was inconceivable in the pre-modern world was precisely because there were no amenities available to the totalitarian leaders to control the nation. For example, the amenities like roads, railroads, telephone, things like that. In Eritrea, it remains a low-tech country still. That has made it almost impossible to control the population. So for all these reasons, what I am driving at is the fluidity of there is a stage called the mobilization stage in every totalitarian system. It happened during Stalin in Russia. It happened during Mao in China. Now, that mobilization stage has to stop somewhere if the totalitarian system is to stabilize, to have total control over its population. In the Eritrean case, what makes it problematic is that stage has never been stabilized. The mobilization that it started about 25 years ago has never stopped, precisely because every time, for example, every time in Sawa, tens of thousands of young men and women go through training in Sawa every year, about 20, 30,000 of them. And every year, the same amount of number of young men and women leave Eritrea, which means that it will have to keep on mobilizing if it has to remain uh, uh, in power. The government it has made in power. That means that Eritrea has a fluid stage, at the fluid stage of totalitarianism, and that is where the expenses come at most. If it never stops, it cannot afford to continually mobilize for 25 years. Now Eritrea remains a very hollowed out nation, hollowed out not only demographically, economically, socially, politically, in every sense, the nation is now a hollowed out country. So uh, it's precisely that picture that we want to show the world. Why Eritrea is at this stage, we'll have to show the world. We'll have to explain to them the nature of the totalitarian regime in Eritrea. Not only that it is different from dictatorships, but also even from other totalitarian states, in the sense that it has never come out from the mobilization stage, where the expense is too high for the population. It's that kind of image that we want to show to the Western world.
Great, thank you. And we'll go to your take on what you meant by the democracy project. But related to the first question, just if you can just briefly answer, one of our regular viewers
Mhm.
is asking, related to what you are answering, why hasn't the West overthrown Isaiah's regime? What do the West get in return by keeping him in power, except a weak Eritrea that won't to interfere in the Red Sea matters? That's from our viewer. So it's related to what you answered, but
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, I get it. Yeah. Well, part of I was trying to answer that one, but I
Mm,
don't think that the West intentionally is keeping Isaias in power. At most, what I think is that they believe that containing him, the same sin that the EPRDF did. For example, in the 27 years, the EPRDF was in power in Addis Ababa. They felt that all that they had to do, this is too small of a nation, they wouldn't bother with it. If they contain it, that's all that they need to do. They don't need to overthrow the Isaias regime. All that they have to do is contain it. So the same stand, the US took the same stand. It was a containment policy. And it felt that the EPRDF regime was doing enough to contain it. So it was comfortable with it. Plus, there was this idea of, when it comes to uh, terrorism, for example, the main concern of the US in that region. Somehow, even though they sanctioned him precisely because they thought that he was helping Al Shabaab, they still felt that Eritrea was doing a good job of uh, preventing Islamic fundamentalism in that area. So somehow they felt that uh, uh, he's doing them to some extent, a favor by controlling that part of concern that they have in that area. But nevertheless, the other thing that I believe is that, I mean, these are big nations, the US and the EU. They are not concerned on what goes on in small nations like Eritrea, not only in Eritrea but all over Africa. It's coming secondary to them, unless it comes out in a big way, like it did in the last 2 years with the war in Tigray. I believe uh, the change in understanding, or probably now they understand that they have underestimated the Isaias regime. His the capacity that he has in or the willingness that he has to destabilize the whole region, even at the expense of suicide, committing suicide. They knew, now they are realizing the extent of uh, the problem that he could generate throughout that area. So now probably they will pass from containment to uh, regime change. But again, we have to be careful about the phrase regime change. It has been very much, looked at through negativity, precisely because of the past, especially on the Middle East, when the U.S. When that term was popularized at that time, it had a positive connotation, but it failed in various areas, in from Afghanistan to all the way to Libya, and now it evokes, it triggers that kind of emotion. But now, when we are saying regime change in Eritrea, we are not advocating for American planes to bomb Eritrea. What we are telling is somehow, with cooperation, be it with the opposition groups, with Tigray or with Ethiopia, with whatever it is, somehow this government has to go, or else a lot of problems are going to show up. For example, one of the things that probably has could make the West change its mind is Isaiah's recent uh, uh, excursions, toward this both Russia and China. Huh? What he has been doing over that is he's probably looking for a protector, given what is happening throughout the region. Uh, he could look that he could use the only resource that Eritrea has, is the Red Sea. It's about 1,000 kilometers long of shores, and there are many islands in the Red Sea that Eritrea owns. So the idea that Russians could have a base in Dahlak or in Asab or in Massawa, or the Chinese could have that part also could have you could easily connect it with the Western interest. So I believe that there is a change of heart among the West, but how far I cannot say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That's good. That covers it well. So on the democracy project, so I mean, regime change by itself is not what would. It's not. It's a means. It's not an end. So,
Mhm.
what do you say about the democracy project element of all this?
Well, of course, as an organization, FELSI believes that, it firmly believes that Eritrea will have to be democratized after the regime change. But the democracy project that I am talking about, well, what we wanted to talk about in the symposium is it has both elements of it. One element is that exactly what is needed after the regime change in Eritrea. The constitution, the multi-party system, the transitional government, and so forth, and so on and so forth. All of that we will have to talk about it. But the negative part of the democracy project is that I have already mentioned part of what it is that the moment you talk about stress about democracy after the regime change, uh, then you are skipping the hardest part of the job. You are skipping uh, the regime change itself. So in the among the opposition in Eritrea, some of them, not all of them, have used the democracy project uh, as a means to protect the regime itself. For example, they would say, uh, if we could rally around the constitution, then everything would be okay. Or we shouldn't focus that much on regime change precisely because Isaias is old. All the ministers and the people in higher positions are probably in their 70s and 80s. So it's anyway, it's coming to an end. So all that we have to do is prepare ourselves for democracy. So it has been used, as a double-edged sword. And that's what we wanted to talk about, that the focus should be mainly on regime change. Not because we hate democracy, but the smaller part of the symposium will address the necessity of democracy in Eritrea. But the democracy project per se, as I said before, it keeps it keeps humanizing the Isaias regime. It tells the world, it gives the world a false picture of a regime whose sins is uh, lack of democracy. But as I have already talked about it, it goes more than that. So when we say about the democracy project, uh, we are saying that we have to be careful. For example, as I said before, every every year, uh, when it comes to the prisoners that were during the 2001, when the journalists and the G15, those higher officials in the Eritrean government, every year we remember them, and that's as it should be. But someone who looks from a distance, you could say, okay, if this is the sin of Eritrea, if sin is uh, in holding higher officials and journalists as prisoners, then it's not different from what many other nations do. You could see that, in Turkey, you could see in Uganda, and many other places, But in a way, it humanizes the regime itself. That's the whole point. We have to be careful not to humanize the regime by simply depicting it as another form of dictatorship. So I keep coming back again and again to that because it have been used as uh, uh, a means of we set our eyes off the main point that we have to do. So that's what we should focus on, because nobody talks, for example, in those days, about the tens of thousands of prisoners in Eritrea. I haven't seen that much talk about tens of thousands of prisoners in Eritrea. All these prisoners are farmers, teachers, young men and women, old women, parents. These are people that has nothing to do with politics, and that is the main problem of Eritrea. We should focus on that one. For example, in the prisons of Eritrea, lately we have heard that there is a tunnel inside Asmara, a tunnel which runs from the stadium all the way for about 2 kilometers, that the Italians built before to be part of the sewage system of Asmara. I'm not sure whether it has ever been used as a sewage system or not, but now more than 700 prisoners are stationed there in Asmara, in a tunnel, in a tunnel. These are besides, the underground prisoners, the container, the people, the prisoners that are put in containers, the concentration camps. I call it, in fact, the archipelago of the desert, because all these underground prisoners are scattered throughout Eritrea. Imagine to have uh, more than 400 prisoners spread all over the landscape of Eritrea, in a population only of about 2.5 million. You could have more than 100,000 prisoners among them. Keep coming in and out. So this is the system that explains it. So if you focus, uh, release the political prisoners, then what you are saying is that you are forgetting the rest of the 100,000 prisoners. So that is, when you talk about the democracy project, they keep humanizing the regime. The picture that they send to the outside world is, for example, if somebody from South Korea uh, somehow escapes from South Korea, from North Korea, and goes to South Korea, and if he is asked what is the biggest problem that you have in South Korea, and if he's talking about journalism or liberalism and stuff like that, it would be absurd, because that's not the primary problem of South Korea. And the same thing holds in Eritrea. In
North
fact, at
Korea.
a bigger level, yeah, North Korea. Sorry, the same thing holds in Eritrea. This is in one prison. The picture that you're showing, I think it's in Adabito. This is in one picture, in one prison. There are more. There are also in Asmara now many villas civilian villas that have been turned into anonymous prisoners, and people have come to recognize them because they hear the neighborhood hears of what goes on over there, the beatings, the screamings, and stuff like that. So this is a very abnormal nation. There are even the question of asnahalay phenomena. I don't know how to say it in English. What they do is a certain colonel, for reasons that are only known to himself, would go against somebody in Azmara, let's say, for example, and then he would take him and put him in a prison outside of his jurisdiction, and he tells them, "Asnahalay, keep it for me," and he forgets about him. He totally forgets about him, and then the people, I mean, the prison officials cannot send him free because of fear of what might happen to them. So they don't know why he is there in the prison, and he is forgotten there. And there are people who have been staying at the prison for years because the colonel has forgotten them. He could have done it while he was drunk, and there is no reason for them. Nobody knows why they are there. This is a kind of uh, anarchic totalitarianism that you see in Eritrea. So nobody has. I mean, this is one of the traits of this government, of this regime, is that it fears documentation. That is probably one of the most odd part of the totalitarian system in Eritrea. Any kind of documentation, it fears documentation. So it erases any kind of documentation. So nobody knows, for example, how many people are killed in the Liberation Front. For example, thousands of them have been killed in Sahel through Halwa Saura, but there is no documentation at all. So people only know, so and so and so and so. How many people have died? Who are the ones who were killed? Nobody knows. The same thing is now in Eritrea. There is the fear of documentation had made many people anonymous. So one could, get lost in the prison system in Eritrea without knowing why he is there, who has put him over there, whether he will come out of it, when will he come out of it. Nobody knows. This is the state of the Eritrean prison system in Eritrea right now. So that is the kind of picture that we should send, not simply the picture of a few dignitaries that we come up every year, release for example any one of those, release the journalists. Okay, that should be done, but that is just a tiny picture of the whole system. I keep saying that again and again because that's exactly what we want to hammer on this symposium.
Hmm. Great. One of the things that is at the center of this symposium is the Tigray genocide. And I saw the schedule or the draft, and you are also mentioning at least a number of times here during the show. So why focus on Tigray genocide in terms of the symposium?
Well, okay. I believe now at this point in time, if there is a cardinal seal of Eritreans, it is their role in the genocide of Tigray. Already, as part of all genocides, Eritreans are denying. There are some Eritreans who are denying that they have ever conducted genocide in Tigray. Uh, Even among the opposition groups, there are those who say that even if it is conducted, why should we admit it? Why should we admit it? Anyways, the world has not designated whatever happened in Tigray as genocide up to now. Why are we rushing to to admit that? So anyway, this is what we have done as Eritreans. We have been part uh, of this huge uh, criminal act, that is the genocide in Tigray, that has killed hundreds of thousands, at minimum hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans. So for us, if we are ever to live in peace in that environment, in peace and prosperity, in that the first thing that we have to do is admit what we have done in the Tigray genocide in all its aspects. That would be the beginning of healing. If there is going to be a beginning of healing, the first one is to admit what you have done, and after that, of course, the healing process has to be started. Now, probably is not the right time because the Tigray genocide is still going on, by the way, both by Eritreans and the Amharas in the western part of Tigray. So I think we have been precisely because of that we wanted to highlight the totality of the Tigray genocide. There are 2 points that we want to highlight. One is how many, I mean, the participants themselves, that this is a globalized Tigray genocide, probably the first globalized genocide in the world, in the sense that not only has it been happening in broad daylight, for the whole world to see, but also many of the world, actors have been participating in this Tigray genocide. Okay. As you have with your, for example, you could see the Amhara, Ethiopia, Eritrea have, I mean, the main actors in this Tigray genocide. But there are also the regional forces like UAE, Turkey, and Iran in providing all the kinds of amenities, like drones and other means, financially also, in conducting Tigray genocide. Then there are the global forces also. Take Russia and China, who has been blocking every effort at the United Nations to highlight, what's going on in Tigray. So they have those also partners in the Tigray genocide. But that is also it doesn't mean the West has got scot free. The West too, either through commission or omission, has been participant in Tigray genocide. For example, the EU were unwilling to talk about the Western Tigray part, precisely because they were afraid if Tigray had access of Western Tigray, then probably hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans would make it to Sudan, a huge refugee problem, which could exacerbate finally the migration problem in Europe. So precisely because of that, uh, they never were uh, loud enough, when it comes to the atrocity, the ethnic cleansing that was going on inside Tigray. And if it comes to the U.S. also, I believe the U.S. main concern was the unity of Ethiopia. The unity of Ethiopia has somewhat uh, immobilized the U.S. from taking forceful action against Tigray genocide. It could have done more to stop Tigray genocide, but it felt that if it's going to do more Tigray, it means, uh, such as, for example, the Western Tigray that I told you about, and that it would come at the cost of Ethiopian unity. So this way or that way, if you look at it, that is the picture that we are getting. And as I said before, you remember during I think it was Clinton era when the genocide in Rwanda happened. What they said was never again, and the reason why they said that at that time was that they were not. They, somehow they didn't know the extent of what was going on in Rwanda. That was their excuse. But now they cannot say that. In fact, the Tigray genocide happened on Biden's watch. It started almost, at the end towards at the beginnings of at the end towards the end of Trump administration, but it took place in the 2.5 years, the 2 years at least of Biden's watch. So there cannot be any excuse when it comes to Tigray genocide by saying we didn't know and so on and so forth. That's why not only was the Tigray genocide happened in the open, but also it happened through direct or indirect participation of regional and global forces too.
Okay, we are uh, inching to the close of the show, but you also have a number of focus areas within the Tigray genocide in your symposium.
Yeah, that's why what I wanted to show was that it has to be shown in its totality. Although I haven't been successful in doing that, it will only be part of this that we will talk about in the symposium. But look at it. Here it is. Here is the way I see it. There is the siege itself, the Tigray siege. The encirclement of Tigray, which achieved hundreds of thousands of deaths of Tigrayan deaths through the denial of food, medicine, cash, electricity, fuel, and all kinds of services. Because precisely because of that, hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans have perished. And then there is the cultural genocide, which you have shown at the bottom, worshipping places, religious artifacts, historical priestess massacre. All of this is the cultural genocide of Tigray. And then there is a mass rape, which is another form of weaponized mass rape, weaponized for a genocidal purpose. Then there is, of course, the massacres that happened throughout Tigray. In fact, I was hoping to show the massacre map of Tigray. I haven't succeeded in doing that. Uh, that was, it would have shown us exactly which places and how many people died. In fact, those who have done this kind of map, they have achieved in a sense that tens of thousands have been killed in Tigray only through massacres, like the Aksum massacre, for example. That a huge part of that was done by the Eritrean troops and the Amharas. The Amharas probably, which hasn't been told yet, I believe that the greatest killing fields in Tigray has been done in western Tigray. Not only have they totally ethnically cleansed it, but they have also massacred probably tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people in western Tigray. And then, of course, the millions that they have displaced. So, through displacement, through massacres, through infrastructural genocide, infrastructures, okay, here it is. So, this is, one of the maps that I was looking for, and you could easily see how many villages were concerned about. I remember I used to collect those villages and cities one by one as they used to come out at that time. So good
You located here around 276
places in
places.
Tigray.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that doing that, and others also were doing, but I never came out with a map. I think the map is it you're doing or uh, somebody else's?
It's a team of people, including Melissa Atzbaha in Sweden, who did it for UMD Media.
All right, okay,
Yeah.
good. So you see it, and then you could also see one thing. If you look at the western part of Tigray, where probably the deaths are more than the rest of Tigray, you don't see that many villages over there, precisely because I mean, nobody knows, they are still it is still under Amhara occupation, and nobody knows how many people have been. In fact, the first time the U.S. admitted, in fact, it was Blinken himself that he said that an ethnic cleansing is going on throughout Western Tigray because he saw through, I mean, satellites, they saw that many of the villages, there were no movement of human beings on the village, which means they have been entirely cleansed. So these are the different aspects of uh, the genocide that is taking place in Tigray, and it would have been good, to, for example, if we could arrange a different kind of symposium only focused on the genocide of Tigray and show the world how in its totality, because through many things, the destruction of the infrastructure inside Tigray, is one of them. The ethnic cleansing is another one. The ecocide, even the ecocide. ecocide, which means the environmental destruction of Tigray. I remember, deliberately, the Eritrean troops deliberately cutting off trees, in order to denude, Tigray of forests. And then, of course, if you deny Tigray electricity, in these 2 years, the Tigrayans were forced to cut the trees in order to, I mean, there is no other fuel. So they replaced that by cutting the trees. So Tigray went back probably 30, 40 years back, in denuding its forests. So an ecocide has been conducted in Tigray. So we have to look at it in a different way. Only then we will see the totality of the totality. Even I remember at one time the Eritrean troops were herding uh, hundreds of donkeys from around Tembian towards Eritrea, and people was wondering what the hell are they trying to do. But the evil mind of Sha'biya was clear. What it was trying to do was it was nearing harvest time, and in those remote villages, uh, donkeys are all the transportation is done by the donkeys. If you don't have the donkeys, you wouldn't know what to do with, how do you transport the harvested grains, So it was with that intention. In a sense, they were destroying. They were not only uh, destroying the infrastructure as we know, the roads and stuff like that, but also the traditional means of sustaining the society. They were also intentionally destroying it. Only after they destroyed the entire infrastructure of Tigray was the encirclement came after that. Then it became complete because there is nothing left in Tigray. Now you encircle it, you starve it to death. That was the plan, and they succeeded to do at least half of that. They killed almost 1 million Tigrayans. So anyway, we want to show this one, and that, but mainly, what was the Eritrea's role in all of this is our focus, because not on what Amhara done or it could come up, but our main focus will be the Eritrea's role, because without the Eritrean role in this entire saga, the Ethiopians could have never achieved the encirclement of Tigray, or the war in Tigray. So we have to show to the world this one.
Mm.
And Eritrean special. That's our aim. Yeah.
Great, great. The last part is as part of this symposium, you are also launching a new magazine, Falsi Dialogue. I'm just wondering if you can spend some minutes, a couple of minutes, if possible, to
Uh-huh.
talk about what it is and what the content is.
Okay, some of the good things that happened as a result of this symposium, the result of the idea of this symposium was we had to rush launching a magazine. Now it will be a quarterly magazine to come out every 3 months. The first edition we have already finished it. Of course, we were rushing it, and the people that contributed to it, I mean, the articles that has been contributed are not part of what's going on inside in the symposium, because they need time, to submit their articles. Some of them, of course, not all of them, but some of them will submit their articles after the symposium. So what we did is we came up with kind of a hodgepodge, a kind of magazine for a first edition. It is a combination of articles that has been written before. For example, my article, it is called Fathers and Sons in the Grammar of Independence, that I wrote years back in asmarino.com. There is another one written by Yosef. No, no, sorry. Um, uh, well, I forgot his name. There's another one written by Zakaria Lubona, for example, that has to do with the festivals of Eritrea, which was also written, about 10 years ago. And now he kind of is revising it, but it's still potent, one of those potent articles. And we have also, for example, an excellent poet by the name of Gabriel Bangul. We have his poetry, and we have also a short story by him. And so we have, a number of articles, about five or so articles, a number of poetry. I have also my side of the poetry, if you can call them poetry, because they are short stanzas, haiku-like stanzas that I used to write in admarino.com. So most of them are from admarino.com, but I have added also some others. They are about martyrdom, the liberation, nationalism, identity. These are the ones that keep bothering Eritreans again and again. So, for example, if you look at the first of that, the breastfed thoughts, for example, uh, so let me try to read it from here. When a nation at war with itself invokes the name of martyrs, mothers lose their instinct to protect their young and spill their milk on dry earth. Now, the whole idea is this, the mothers of Eritrea, at certain, not all of them, but at a certain time, I believe they have done things that would be unbelievable for any mother to do. The primary, motherhood itself is protecting its young, not only in human beings, in all the animal kingdom, it's the primary task of a mother is that one. But if you lose that motherly instinct, if the national, the ultra nationalism Eritrea has done to its people, uh, is that the mothers, some of the mothers have lost their motherly instinct. Instead, so the picture that I wanted to show over here is that instead of, the breast is a symbol of motherhood and, feeding its child. But instead of feeding its child, if it spills it on the earth, what it does is it's feeding the dead, it's feeding the martyrs. By feeding the martyrs, you deny, you talk about the dead. That picture is, for example, is what is prevalent in Eritrea right now. Whenever the question of martyrs is mentioned, then anything that you say against them or against the very idea of what it has been doing is considered as treason. The people are so afraid of it, that the totalitarian regime in Asmara has been using it for many purposes. For example, in this war, they invoke the image of martyrs. If you don't do this, if you don't fight against the Tigrayans, then you are betraying the idea of our martyrs, and people keep believing this, even though they couldn't, they couldn't tell how could we gain any from the war against Tigray. They never questioned that question, because one of the things that they will do is because our martyrs died for it. So the very image of martyrs becomes a continuation of martyrdom in Eritrea. That is the whole picture that I wanted to show on this one. Uh, uh, this one, for example, is the archaeological finding Asmara. I remember it was around 2000 or 2000 something. There was a huge archaeological finding in Asmara in the Sembel area. Now the government, the reaction should be, they believe that it predates the Aksumite Empire. That's what fascinated the government. It wanted to show a civilization that is not connected to Aksum. So it was very much interested not for what for what it's worth on its own, whatever the finds are. It's reunions of uh, residential areas in uh, 800 BC or something like that. So, and there is also pottery that was found there, So the Sha'biya was not interested in the finding itself, in the finding for what it's worth. What it attracted it was that now I could bury the other the Aksumite history, so that it will be disconnected. So it uses that archaeological find to bury another past, That was the whole what is motivated it. So this is what I wrote. I don't know when it was found. They dug and dug furiously. Yes, they were ordered to dig more. Yet they were ordered to dig more because the historians felt it wasn't deep enough to bury all the past. So the archaeological fund is not, you know, it was meant to bury another past. That was my idea. So you could see how uh, uh, the uh, the historical maneuverings of the regime go as far as what I think there's a third one, and then we'll finish. Okay, here is this no more sanctuaries. It says, mothers wept and wept from joy or grief. Nobody could tell. For on that very day, their sons trekked home from Mieda. Hambo Hambo went extinct. That needs explanation because I used two Tigrinya terms. Huh? With the day they entered, which was the liberation, the day they entered Asmara in 1991 or so, or whichever the date was. Huh? So people, I mean, they were ecstatic, ecstatic. But the image that I am trying to convey over here is that that very day, those people entered Asmara. Hamba Hambo went extinct in Eritrea. Hamba Hambo represents in the traditional society, it's a tree. I don't know exactly its English name. It's a tree, it's not even a tree, it's more or less like a shrub, but a leafy one. Big leaves, it has big leaves. And much more importantly, in traditional Eritrean landscape, it was found everywhere. It was found everywhere. So the idea is that عقبة hambo is in Tigrinya, how you say it, no? So people could take sanctuary. If somebody, for example, a bigger guy or an abusive husband wants to beat his wife while they were in the farm, there is an there is always a hambo nearby. All that you should do is run to the hambo and say عقبة hambo, which means he wouldn't dare touch her if she says that. So that becomes a sanctuary. Traditionally, in the village of Eritrea, there are two places where you could take a woman or any weaker person could take, but a woman could take as a sanctuary. For example, no husband is allowed to beat his woman inside the woman's quarter, which is shate. If he does that, the penalty is high. If he does that, he gets a huge penalty from the Heggi, from the local Heggi at that time, the law at that area. Hamba Hambo so represents in Eritrea, Hamba Hambo in the Da'ro, Fariha Abihir and Fariha Heggi, which means the fear of God and the fear of law are two things that are represented by two plants in Eritrea, Hamba Hambo and Da'ro. Hamba Hambo, I don't know exactly. Da'ro is a sycamore tree where the elders used to meet to judge or do any kind of things. It was the central place where villagers meet. So the very idea of the death of Hamba Hambo means the very idea that Gadelti entered Asmara, Hamba Hambo went extinct, which means there are no more sanctuaries for Eritreans anymore. There hasn't been any sanctuary for Eritreans anywhere in Eritrea for the last 30 years. That's the reason for the mass exodus of hundreds of thousands of Eritreans. With that, I will stop. Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And of course, our viewers will have a chance to read this and others in the upcoming magazine Falsi Dialogue, the first of which will be released in connection with the symposium. So, for those who are interested to be part of these, I just want to mention the dates again and the place. This is July 14th, 15th, and 16th, 3 days symposium in Washington, D.C. That is 620 Michigan Avenue, Northeast, Washington, D.C.
Uh,
20064. Yusuf, you want to say something on that?
Yeah, well, yes, it's the Catholic Church. Sorry, the Catholic University, for those who know it. Huh? And uh, additionally, there's one thing that I want to say. We have also, in that very university, we have also reserved rooms for those who are interested. They are very cheap. about $50 per room. Compare that with the hotels around, it would you'd have to pay $200 to $300 for room. So if any one of you are interested, because there is a deadline, we can't keep them uh, forever. So there is a deadline for that. For anyone who are interested to come to our uh, symposium from outside, we have those rooms. All that you have to do is call us, and we'll reserve it for you. With that, I think I'm all set now.
Great.
uh,
On in terms of connecting with Yosef and the organizing committee and Falsi Salam in general, I have just posted the link falsisalam.org. That is, I want also to bring it on screen if possible. Let me just, yes, here. You see it on the screen, falsisalam.org. You can reach out to the committee, the organization, and so on. I just want to leave our viewers as well with this uh, one of, I think, the past maybe 10 years ago articles by Yosef. This is romanticizing godly. I think you wrote it in different parts, but somebody compiled it into
yeah, yeah.
7 pages
Uh,
and
yeah.
so on. So uh, I also share the link to that where you have a number of um, pages, 37 pages,
Mhm,
where Yosef, as he always does, questions some of the widely held perceptions and understandings and so on. Yosef, I thank you for your time, and I
Thank
hope
you.
you would maybe after the symposium we will
We'll
have
come
an
back.
opportunity, yeah, to talk about how it
Yeah, yeah.
went and
How
what
it went.
happened
We'll
and so
come
on.
back.
Yeah.
Don't forget also, I think we should organize also another symposium, as I have told you,
Mm.
with entirely focused on the genocide of Tigray. uh, I mean, we could come up about 30 or 40 titles, I mean, in all its aspects, and it's still going on. People don't know, for example, the recent US, lifting the on the humanitarian ground in Ethiopia,
Mm.
while it's still going on. It hasn't stopped. Eritreans are still there. The Amharas are still continuing their ethnic cleansing. So we should focus on that one. We should do another big one with that in mind.
Exactly, and relation to that, the suspension of aid, how it's killing civilians
Yes,
and
yes, yes.
so on.
Mhm.
GSTS, the Global Scholars Association of Tigrayan Scholars and Professionals, released a press release today, and a number of organizations, including JSTS, are reacting to that. So it's very important to have a symposium dedicated to the Tigray genocide. And I want to thank you for your time, Joseph, and best wishes with the remaining days in
All right.
organizing this important symposium. Have a good
Thank you,
one.
thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, thank you,
Okay,
thank you
great.
for all listeners. Also. Thank you.
Okay, you have been following my conversation with Joseph Gabrahewat, one of the organizers of the symposium. Why do we need regime change in Eritrea now? That will be held in Washington, D.C., July 14 to 16. The address I showed you, and maybe I can show you again, is 620 Michigan Avenue, Northeast Washington, D.C., 20064. You can go to Falsi uh, salam.org as well for further information and for anything. If you have any question to them, you can also reach out to them, including the hotel accommodation and so on. And tomorrow at 12 p.m. Uh, Eastern Time, we'll be back. ምስ መስራቲት ቤት ትምህርቲ በሪ ማይዳ ደጊምካ ተስፋ ምዝራዕ ኣዋልድ ተምሃሮ ገጠራት ትግራይ ካብ ሳምረ ራያ ክሳብ ዶግዓ ተንቤን ምስ ኮሎኔል ዘነዋ ሰማሃኝ ክንመለስ ኢና። መስራቲት ቤት ትምህርቲ በሪ ማይዳ ኣብ ሳምረ ማለት እዩ። ኣብ ዶግዓ ተንቤን እውን ኣሎ። ዝበፅሖ ፀገም ዘን ገጠራት ትግራይ ዝነበራ ዋልድ ካብ ሻምናይ በፂሐን ክቅፅላ ዘይክእላ ንኣተን ንምሕጋዝ ተቢሉ ዝተሰርሐ ዕዉት ስራሕቲ ዝሰርሕ ዝነበረ ኣብቲ ፃነተ ግን ጉድኣት ዝበፅሖ ንዝምልከት ምስ ኮሎኔል ዘነባ ሰማህኝ ኣብቲ ስራሕቲ ዝበፅሖ ፀገም እንታይ ማለት እዩ ከመይ ክሕገዝ ይኽእል ብዝብል ክንዕልል ኢና ፅባሕ 12 p.m. Eastern Time ምስ UMD Media. That was the show for today. Have a good one, everyone. Good night. Good day.